This year, BMW Group Design created an installation for their Salone del Mobile that centers around the BMW Vision Neue Klasse. Together with the BMW Vision Neue Klasse X, it represents the next model generation of the brand and the transformation of the entire BMW Group. The exchange with creators from various fields is very important for BMW and for the design team, which is why BMW invited Alice Rawsthorn to have a conversation with Holger Hampf. The two visionaries will discuss the future of mobility and in detail how design can be an accelerator for positive change. First of all, I want to introduce our two protagonists. Alice is an award-winning design critic, an influential public speaker and a social media commentator. She's written critically acclaimed books and columns for the New York Times, for example. In all her work, Alice champions the design's potential to address complex social, ecological, and even political challenges. She says, "The most thrilling periods are the one of the greatest change, when designers interpret shifts in science, technology, behavior, and politics for the rest of us." We'd like to know more about your opinion, Alice, and expertise in our talk. Holger Hampf is head of Designworks, the BMW Group's own design consultancy. Designworks is a vital part of BMW's group's strategic design toolbox, an inspiring, thought-provoking studio that splits its workload between the BMW Group and external clients. Designworks is involved in many internal tasks from the BMW Group, but also from product design through strategy to identifying new business potential. The studios in Munich, Shanghai, and Santa Monica function as an innovation incubator and think tank, bringing unconventional solutions to the entire BMW Group. Thank you for having this conversation, where I would like to know more about how design can be a positive trailblazer and how design can even be an attitude. Holger, the BMW Vision Neue Klasse you brought to Milan as an installation is what you call the new innovation and technology booster for the entire BMW portfolio. Can you outline what it means in terms of design and how it stands for a specific design attitude at BMW?
Yes, certainly. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the online audience. The Neue Klasse, or what we call it, the road to Neue Klasse, is really a journey that started for us some 2.5 years ago. Even before that, BMW invested time into inventing products like the BMW i portfolio, the i3, the i8. We presented vision cars like Circular Vision to the world, Vision D, and now Neue Klasse. So really a lot of different aspects and moments in a design process are coming together in Neue Klasse. The car that you are seeing outside here in Milan is really only the start of an entire transformation of our product portfolio. A new form language that we will be applying to many cars to follow. I think it has been a bold move on our end. I would think that we are very ambitiously try to jump a product generation here and introduce a product that looks and feels more like future than any other car before. We want that actually when you see this car in about a year from now on the street, that you turn your head and you know this is something different. This, I would say, stands for an attitude and design. Design always follows new technologies, changes in software and hardware, other very smart people making an offering, and design and designers combining these things into a new story, into a new product proposition or service proposition. So at the end, I would say design is a translator of different things in combination, creating one overarching story, a harmonized story, and an orchestration of singular experiences that we find in cars today.
Alice, you wrote a brilliant book named Design as an Attitude, which explores how design in our times of radical change transforms itself from a commercial role in the industrial age to a discipline of resourcefulness and ingenuity. Can you share your findings and explain how design has the power to transform society with a particularly positive impact?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here, and thank you for praising the book. It's very kind of you to do so. Design as an Attitude essentially talks about how design has evolved since the industrial age to continuing to address all the issues that it threw up, but also to playing a more strategic role, to function as an agent of change that can ensure that changes of any type, whether they're scientific, technological, the changes Holger was referring to, social, political, cultural, or environmental, can be interpreted in ways that will affect our lives positively rather than negatively. And also that the practice and possibilities of design have been transformed by digital technology and the availability of now relatively familiar, affordable, easily accessible digital tools that have enabled designers to operate independently to pursue their own goals, whether they're commercial, social, cultural, or environmental. So two quick examples of this, of transformed design practice because of technology. One is forensic architecture. This is an investigative design agency that's based at Goldsmiths University in London, and it was founded by the architect A.L. Weisman, and they use design and spatial software tools, but also what's called open source intelligence. So this is evidence of human rights abuses, climate crimes, and other serious misdemeanors that the general public can shoot on cell phones. So it would be cell phone photos, video clips, evidence from Find My app, CCTV cameras, and so on. And these have, the combination of all these tools, they have used them to establish the truth about climate crimes and human rights abuses, and also, for example, during the Ukraine war, establishing evidence that could eventually bring Russia to trial over abuses. And secondly, a rather more benign example is Sehat Kahani. And this is a telemedical service that was launched by two women doctors in Pakistan, Sara Kuram and her friend Ifat Agar. And they had both graduated as doctors, got married and had children, and succumbed to cultural pressure to give up their careers and stay at home and look after the kids in the conventional way. And they were both obsessed by medicine and technology. So they commissioned the design of a telemedical service that would enable what are called doctor brides like themselves to practice from home, to diagnose patients and then consult them on this video conferencing platform. They then launched an app which enabled them to fulfill a similar service. Within 8 years, they're now treating 7 million people in Pakistan online. And this is a country where less than half the population has regular access to healthcare. So that shows, in a very vulnerable situation, what a positive difference inspiring and intelligent design can make.
I think these were both brilliant examples of, like, if you look at the conventional idea of what design can be, you'll find these amazing examples. And I think that's, Olga, one of the reasons why BMW regularly seeks exchange with other design disciplines, such as architecture, even arts. How does designworks, with its very intercultural context, come into play at that point?
Yeah, I think, like Alice said, design as it stands today has a much bigger role and responsibility than it ever had before. I think we've all experienced the age of form giving and design as a styling exercise. This is long gone. Design plays a much more important role. Like I said before, it is as much a translator, and it is also a visualization tool to create awareness, and to create also an audience that is addressed, an audience that you listen to, and that you integrate into your work attitude. The model of designworks as a subsidiary of BMW Group is quite unique. As with Neue Klasse as well, we are striving to create a global product that is not only successful in markets like Italy or Europe, it has to work around the world. And designworks with its 3 studios is a think tank, creative incubator of BMW Group, but it brings a global opinion to BMW Group, and it ensures that we listen to all kinds of different users and cultures around the globe, and that we address topics and concerns that are existing today. As for many different disciplines, obviously Milan is the perfect play of many of these different things. We, as BMW, come here repeatedly to bring inspiration, but we also come here to be inspired by this market and by the context, by all the people that are around the city in of itself. To me, on the forefront, it always looks very joyful and friendly, but really, when you dig into some of the things to see here, you see the intense dialogue between designer and product category, and it's an expert dialogue almost to find in Milan. So again, the context here is very inspiring to us. And ever more so, it comes from a dialogue that goes across disciplines, across art, engineering, and design. Like I said before, very often a new technology inspires design to do something differently. Again, in the past, we've very often experienced that design and engineering were somewhat enemies, and they didn't really want to talk to one another. Today, and especially at BMW, we experienced exactly the opposite. They inspire each other, and they work with each other to bring forward a greater product.
Creativity is about to see what's possible and be radical about it. I'm quoting Rick Rubin, the well-known music producer who wrote a book about human creativity. Alice, would you agree that visionary design must be, in a way, radical? And I'd like to know, for you as a design critic, which projects in designers catch your attention? Is it the radical ones, or which ones are you convinced by?
Well, it's an excellent question. I mean, first of all, I think visionary design does have to be radical. It's difficult to imagine how it could be visionary without being, but that's not to say that there is anything wrong with intelligent, responsible, and sensitive reinventions or incremental improvements in existing design projects. They can be important and beneficial too. One of the wonderful things about writing about design is there are so many extraordinary designers to write about, both contemporary figures and also I'm equally obsessed by design history, and that's a wonderful history to mine. So I have chosen 2 examples of designers whose work I love and who in very different ways are both visionary and yet also fulfilling more traditional archetypes of design. And my first example would be the brilliant Dutch book designer Irma Boom, who for me is the greatest living book designer. And Irma is completely obsessed by books. She, when she isn't designing, she's visiting the Vatican Library to look at the books there. She's investigating the history of book design or the history of typography to identify new ideas to apply. And at a time when the book, of all products, is completely under fire and in theory cannot compete on all sorts of levels, ecologically being prime among them, with the apps on a Kindle or your phone or whatever, Irma manages to design books that are so animating, so emotionally engaging, whose physicality transforms your experience of reading them in all sorts of ways, whether it's scenting the pages, varying the size of the typography in different ways, that she adds a different element to the experience that a digital book cannot offer. So I'm always excited to see her work. I've never been disappointed by it, ever. She's an extraordinary designer to follow. And my second example would be Forma Fantasma, who are 2 Italian designers, Andrea Tremacchi and Simone Farasin, who are based here in Milan. And they started off as highly intelligent, very original and imaginative product designers, and have honed a very successful career in product design. So for instance, they have some beautiful lights on display in Milan at the moment that they developed for Floss, which is still the leading lighting manufacturer in the world, certainly when it comes to innovative design. And yet they have always wanted to have a different dimension to their practice. So they also initiated investigative research exercises into big issues in design. So one of them was to study the vast, often illicit, global trade in digital waste, to identify problems that it caused and the reasons why those problems had developed, but also ways in which design practice could be changed to avoid them. Another was to look at the global timber trade, which has a toxic history from the slave trade onwards. And so they have introduced different dimensions to design whilst also fulfilling the role of intelligent and responsible product designers.
Thank you. Holger, you are aiming for an automobile that is more intelligent, seamless and more user-friendly at the same time. What are the challenges in terms of the design, and how do you orchestrate the various aspects to consider during the design process?
Again, the design process has become much more multidisciplinary, and you don't find, as you've in the past, and especially with automotive design, a much more siloed application of expertise or competence. Today, I would say an exterior designer is relying as much on the user interface designer as the other way around. So I think in Neue Klasse we really achieved to get away from thinking about singular experiences or singular aspects of a design, singular touch points, and try to create something that is very together and orchestrated, that comes together quite nicely. And you can achieve that, obviously, when you work across disciplines. It has, with Neue Klasse, become much more important to prioritize and feature the question why you would do certain things instead of what you would do. In the past, very often, we had certain technologies and designers took that one technology and interpreted it, and we had certain features in the car, and you all know in automotive design specifically, it's a race to the next big feature, the next big user interface functionality. In Neue Klasse, we took a step back, and we also really thought a lot about what can be taken away, what is unnecessary to a user, and what would simplify an experience. You know, in our world today, and you just have to step outside on the road, as beautiful as it is quite noisy and it is quite complex to all of us. And Neue Klasse really, for us, stands for a more radically reduced experience and in its way more true to BMW. At any given point of time in the design process, across all disciplines, we wanted to make sure that you always understand the product and the brand, that you see it in this car or in this lineup of cars. And we took things away and checked if it's still a BMW, and then kind of went for the next step. So really new design process across discipline, an exercise in reduction and in simplification, taking out noise. And yeah, I think you hopefully see this in the example we have upstairs.
Alice, if I'm thinking of like the KonMari method, for example, or Apple's barely their design philosophy, we all have an urge to simplify our lives. Can you give a few design examples where a kind of radical minimalism improved the experience of the user? And do you have an example in mind where design could not or could not yet be simplified due to its nature?
Sure. Well, my example of radical simplification actually relates to the design concept of the project. And it's the work of the French architectural practice, Lacaton and Vassal. And they have been extremely successful. They won the Pritzker Prize 4 years ago. But their focus isn't on designing and constructing new buildings. It's taking old buildings and working out the most intelligent and environmentally responsible way of reusing them. And they do this with such empathy, such imagination, such compassion for the people who will be living or working in the buildings that they make them very, very special. So, for example, one of their biggest projects was a massive public housing project in France, in one of the banlieues dortoirs around Paris. And all the flats had balconies. And they realized that if they persuaded all the residents, which they knew was going to be a tough challenge, to give up their balconies, but to allow them to transform them into an additional room for their apartments, that everyone would benefit. So obviously some of the residents were thrilled, others took a lot of convincing, but when you see what the residents have done by being gifted this extra space, it's really moving. They use them for all sorts of different reasons, some practical, others self-indulgent, and so on. So I think that's a brilliant example of simplifying design practice in a way that's sustainably valid and has very useful lessons for every area of design going forward into the future. As for my example of design that has so far eluded, or rather a product that has eluded the many benefits of radical minimalism, I'm not sure whether it conforms to the definition or whether it's just one of my favorite hate products. But one product which, and I have bought lots of them from many different brands, none of them work. The user interface software is a nightmare, and this is the digital printer. You know, you get your fingers stuck in them, they conk out very quickly, you could spend the rest of your life reading the instruction manual, and which I'm sure is longer than BMW's to operate a whole car. They are dreadful. And I know I'm not alone in this, because apparently in rage rooms all over the world where people pay to smash up things they hate, what is the number one product? The digital printer.
That's an excellent one, thank you. Holger, talking about these challenges of creating new visions, the BMW visions are driven by high-tech and human desire at the same time. How do you bring these two aspects together in the design process and language? I know you have a brilliant term for it called Phygital that already in the word makes us aware of how design is becoming one in terms of analog and digital. Yeah, can you explain your perspective on these two aspects?
Well, yeah, I think by now I don't need to explain anymore that kind of the human need and desire comes first. So I think the design process more and more, and this is now, I think, table stakes, has to ask the right questions first. You know, at BMW, especially with Noya Klasse, we started by asking the question, what should the car in 2030, what should it look like, and what would people desire from a car in 2030? So I think that's the starting point of the conversation. So it's very important to not start off technology. You know, I think we've seen many examples, and they might be related to your digital printer, where technology drove the discussion, where technology drove the decisions, you know, that engineering came forward and said, like, we have this great new technology, give it a form. Completely wrong and upside down in a certain way, because it probably created many products that are not very useful and at the end too complicated to use at all. So again, I think it's the question is more about the direction and how to approach a new product proposition or a product vision. Really, and not let it drive by technology that is available. But and I think Apple has been the greatest example of it. You know, it was always about user experience first and what you want to put into the user's hands, and then invent the matching technology for it or come up with the technology for it. And this is, I think, the change also in automotive design that we see.
Alice, there are many critical voices saying that digitality is taking over and that we're losing tactile experiences and a human-centered perspective. Do you have any groundbreaking examples of digital and analog designs where one alone would not be possible or as powerful as the two together?
I do, but I have to begin by saying I actually don't agree that digital technology is somehow crushing the interest and activity in craftsmanship and artisanal activities, because actually the reverse has happened. We all thought digital technology would, but the fact that we do spend so much of our time on our screens, first of all, I think it has really piqued our interest in completely different forms of activity, and hand craftsmanship and artisanal work very much come into that. It is also, and apparently there are endless medical and scientific research studies into this, made us, without necessarily being aware of it, much more sophisticated in our own tactile sensibility, because suddenly we're stroking and pushing and so on, and controlling things in a much more delicate, hand-related way. So if you look at a lot of things, I mean, I was very interested in the upholstery fabrics upstairs. They're gorgeous to look at. They're very tactile and soft and seductive to touch. I think that's an excellent example of the sense of touch and design becoming more sophisticated. But one of my favorite examples of how craft and technology are coming together, I think really for the greater good, is the restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral in France. I mean, that the fire and the destruction of the cathedral, which is, you know, such a defining symbol of Paris, of France, the Roman Catholic Church, was so deeply upsetting to so many people, that has produced a wonderful opportunity for people to rally round, for oak trees to be felled across France, which may or not be a good thing, but that craftsmen have been mobilized, and so medieval techniques of hand craftsmanship have been used to work on specific elements of the cathedral, but everything has been digitally mapped to ensure, you know, to sort of assess potential problems, troubleshoot, and so on. And so it's a wonderful example of how hand craftsmanship and those wonderful ancient skills can really be used in an extraordinary way that people, I think, will really appreciate and warm to, but at the same time, it's completely supported by digital technology, so you have the benefit of both. At least I hope so. Notre Dame is not completed yet, but everything I read about it, all the footage you see, it looks like an impeccable restoration campaign.
Thank you. Coming back to the automotive context, Holger, design plays a fundamental role in BMW's ambition to be a pioneer in the development of in the circular economy. If again we look at the BMW Vision Neue Klasse, can you give examples of how design can make sustainability more desirable?
Well, one example was just coming from Alice by creating superior tactile experiences next to superior digital experiences. I think, you know, at the end you have to achieve both. And sorry for not answering your question earlier. The Phygital icon of BMW, the new light signature, you find many examples in Neue Klasse that I would think perfectly combine digital aspects with physical aspects. They still satisfy our need for something that is touchable and very warm to the touch, but they also they address a need for intelligence in the product. So I think we're aiming for both at BMW. And the second part of your question was, or
it was how design can make sustainability more
sustainability,
more desirable.
Let me touch on this briefly, because I think when we come to sustainability, it has to go beyond the material. And this is basically what the CEO of BMW has been talking about for quite some time now. It stretches across all of your company processes. It starts with your purchasing processes. It starts with your supply chain. And sustainability cannot be only expressed or achieved the greater good by addressing the materiality in the car and the recyclability of material. It has to stretch processes, absolutely. And I think the second thing to me really is to stay committed to it. Reaching sustainability or circular goals is not an overnight deal. We all know this. It has to make use of tenacity and commitment in an organization. It partially takes years. In electric mobility, you experience this right now. There might be a bit of a dip where people talk about, is this really the future? And you have to have a flex strategy for it, which BMW does. But at the same time, you have to stay committed to these circular targets that you set for your organization. And that at the end will bring the success and hopefully also the penetration into the entire organization.
Alice, many designers are now drawing inspiration from various fields of life where boundaries are dissolved. Ideas can arise from digital technology and natural forces at the same time, obviously. Do you think the wider public recognizes the potential design has and can have to create a more sustainable environment?
I think more and more members of the wider public do, but it's very much a work in progress. If you ask most people who you randomly stopped on the street what design is, they would probably think it was something, and it breaks my heart to say this, that blings up trainers and overpriced hoodies, or develops unstable, uncomfortable, very expensive chairs for so-called designer hotels. And of course, design has done all of that. It will continue to do all of that, but there is much, much, much more to it. And I was interested when you asked Holger how design can help sustainability to be desirable. Sustainability is desirable in itself. I think design has to sort of meet the sustainable goals to reflect that. And for younger consumers in particular, if products aren't sustainable, they simply aren't going to buy them. They have a completely different perspective. But it's so important that we carry on trying to convince people that design is one of the most powerful tools at our disposal to help us to manage the complex intersectional challenges that we face, whether it's the climate emergency, the refugee crisis, rising inequality. Tragically, there's a litany of horrors that I could mention. Design can't tackle any of these problems on its own, but when it's used intelligently and in an enlightened and respectful way, it can, in collaboration with specialists from other disciplines, make a meaningful difference by producing lateral solutions and ideas and really injecting originality and imagination into those spheres. So it's hugely powerful, it's hugely important. More and more people do accept that, but there's a lot more work to do.
Holger, you're doing part of that work. If we go from ambition to action, how do you push boundaries in design, and where do you find inspiration, and how do you envision enjoyable, environmentally friendly mobility in the future? I know it's a big question, but I know you have lots of ideas, but maybe if you distill it into a few thoughts on how this is going to look like.
Somewhere in your introduction, there was the word mobility experts. I think both of us, you meant by that. We haven't talked much about it, but I think, to me, it's important to state that individual mobility, is part of the solution. We play a crucial role in this. We have to get it right as BMW. And this is why we are caring so much for these transformational processes that we are going through with Neue Klasse. But mobility is a much bigger story. Alice and I earlier talked about infrastructure needs and the system in of itself that at the end enables our cars to work. Again, I think we're at the beginning, but you can not rely on others to do the job. You have to do it yourself, and I believe BMW is driving that that future vision right now, and we are hoping to convince others to come along for the journey. So again, to me, mobility is such an exciting topic. You mentioned designworks earlier, BMW Group. We work with many external clients to get inspired. We try to see the bigger picture. The car is part of it. It's not the solution alone, but we have to start there and get that right, and think of many other things that surround it at the same time.
That leads me to my last question for Alice. I want to open up the perspective, as we talked a lot about how design can be an accelerator for change. But how can design as a subject be more accessible? And to conclude, do you have a recent example where design in the field of mobility does or did bring major improvement whilst bringing joy to users?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I think part of my responsibility as a design critic and writer is to ensure that people are presented with evidence, with absolutely rigorous evidence of design's value. And so to that end, with a friend, Paolo Antonelli, who's the Senior Curator of Design at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, during the pandemic, we launched a research platform called Design Emergency, where initially we identified the global design leaders in the design response to COVID-19, the medical illustrator in Atlanta, Georgia, who designed the spiky blob, which went viral globally within 2 or 3 days. Apparently it's the most famous medical illustration in history. It was in its first week. The New Zealand creative director of an ad agency who designed what we felt was the world's best public information campaign. And so we interviewed these people once we tracked them down on Instagram Live. And then after 10 weeks, we thought we wanted to focus on the end game, which was really how can design reinvent our lives for better in the future. So we launched a podcast, a YouTube channel. We published a book with the stream of interviews we were doing in the global leaders of design in many, many different areas and from all over the world. And for us, that work is very important because we very carefully choose figures who can talk in an articulate but accessible way about their work and have proven examples of the impact that design's made. So it could be a Jordanian landscape architect, Dima Asaf, who has developed a way of accelerating the growth of forests in Jordan so she can grow forests. She's already grown 7 of them in areas of Jordan that thousands of years ago were dense with forest but have been desert in recent years, to very famous designers and architects like Pete Adolf, who's undoubtedly the most influential garden and landscape designer of our time, the High Line in New York and so on, and prompting us all to fall in love with weeds again. To turn to mobility, my favorite example is going to be a very personal one. I love driving, and I do drive a Mini, which is part of the BMW family, but I also love cycling. And London City Council implemented various so-called benefits for cyclists for many years, which were completely useless. They sort of doomed us to death in unnecessary accidents, made cycling so boring, you almost felt like giving it up. But in recent years, they have absolutely got it together. And there's one stretch of the River Thames on the embankment where for 1 kilometre, you can literally cycle in sequence with other cyclists immediately next to the river. So you have the most stupendous view. You're not stopped by any traffic lights. All the vehicular, that's correct, traffic is at a standstill because the embankment always is. So it is the most glorious and joyous of experiences, which I love.
That's a brilliant way to sum up the joy of being mobile and being able to move around. It's been a really inspiring talk. Thank you very much, Alice Rawsthorn. Thank you very much, Holger Hampf, for sharing your thoughts and for sharing your thoughts with the public here in Milan, but also the ones on the screen or in the web. Thank you very much for...
Thank you, Eva.
Thank you. Thank you.
you.